recorded for future viewing. So you're going to see a pop-up window asking you if that's okay. Please hit your continue button to stay with us. My name is Jennifer Moreland, and I will be moderating this Zoom session tonight. We will be using the Zoom chat box, so keep your videos off, keep your mute button on, so no microphone. And when you do use the chat box, please address it to everyone so that I can collect your questions. I will be relaying all of your questions at the end of the presentation. So feel free to put those questions in the chat box as we go along, and I will keep it in my list to relay to the presenters at the end. We will have about 15 minutes allotted for questions, and any questions we don't get to, we will include in the recording that will be available online after tonight. So tonight's presentation is courtesy of the University of Arizona. We are Master Gardener volunteers for the Yavapai County Cooperative Extension. This is an outreach arm of the University of Arizona College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Master Gardeners are trained by the University of Arizona. We provide science-based horticulture information to the public by staffing horticulture help desk lines in both Camp Verde and Prescott Extension offices, as well as presenting talks like we are doing here tonight. Yavapai County currently has over 200 active Master Gardener volunteers. So we have our next presentation scheduled for the night of October 28th. That October presentation will be presented by Steve McIntyre. He will be talking about container gardening. So hopefully all of you can join us on October 28th and watch your email for details and the link to join us for that. So allow me to introduce tonight's two presenters. Rebecca Serrados graduated as a Master Gardener in 2019. She has a certificate in production horticulture from Yavapai College. Professionally, Rebecca is a program coordinator with the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension, and she works throughout Yavapai County with a variety of early childhood, senior housing, and community gardens. Much of her day job involves educating adults on growing vegetables for the first time, and Rebecca grew up in Prescott, Arizona, and can usually be found gardening in her own rocky backyard with her two daughters. Our second presenter tonight is Leanne Frankel, and Leanne graduated as a Master Gardener in 2015. She retired from nursing and now loves gardening, especially growing flowers and herbs and vegetables. She started an educational garden at the Heritage Park Zoo in Prescott, including a preschool program to instill a love of nature in the children and parents alike. Leanne considers herself a lifetime learner about gardening and promotes taking better care of our planet. So with that, let's get started. Rebecca, the mic is yours.
Thanks so much, Jen. And welcome everyone. Give me just a second to share my screen. All right. So welcome. My name is Rebecca Cerratos, and I'm going to get us started tonight. Just to clarify, this class is intended for backyard vegetable gardeners. We are not giving information for the commercial or large scale seed saving that you might be interested in. It's very much for the home gardener. We are also assuming that you have basic vegetable gardening knowledge. And if you don't, we have other classes and courses available at Cooperative Extension. Feel free to reach out in the chat box and get connected to those services if you do need more backyard vegetable growing. All right, so to get us started today, I really like to try and frame every class with what I think y'all are going to walk away with. And so for today, here are our learning objectives. You will learn the importance of saving your own seed. And this will include learning how to save dry seed crops and how to save wet seed crops. And we'll give the differentiation. You will also learn the importance of cross-pollination and how to prevent it and all of the things that happen in that zone. So I'm hoping that you pick up numerous tips and tricks throughout this hour-long presentation. However, this is the bare minimum that I'm expecting you to walk away with tonight. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to talk about the why. Why are you saving your own seeds? So first and foremost, saving your own seeds from your own garden is considered to be the most convenient, but also the most cost effective, right? You grew it, you saved it, you'll grow it again, right? But you also have this variety preference, the ability to choose maybe a certain variety of tomato or runner bean or you that you really, really liked, right? Maybe it's a certain flavor. Maybe it's stored really, really well, right? Having the ability to choose that preference is inherent when you start saving seeds, okay? But there are a few hidden whys behind why some gardeners save seeds, and I wanted to flesh those out here before we get going further. This first is this idea of adaptability, right? Seeds, when they grow, and especially when they're grown and saved over many seasons, start to become adapted to the climate, the locale in which they're grown in, right? This is huge for backyard gardeners because, as you may know, growing in Arizona, we have just a variety of microclimates, things that happen or don't happen. This season, for instance, we had a really pitiful monsoon season. So if you were growing crops with the anticipation that we were going to get a huge influx of rain, you might have been sorely disappointed. However, those crops that survived and thrived without that excess rain are the ones that you might be zeroing in on for this season, right? They held true, they performed well despite, right? The next season, the season after that, and the continuation of seasons, they'll become more adapted. This is important for growing future crops that are well adapted to our locale and our region. The process overall of adaptation for crops in general, and you can think of all of our collective backyard gardens, lends itself to this idea of being biodiverse, right? You have a variety, you have a diversified range of crops that have all been grown in the same locale over and over again. This lends itself to another step up, which is the idea of security. All of us growing all of these amazing crops, especially food crops, over time lends itself to a more robust and secure food system. Even if that's just you sharing food, canned food, jams, jellies, salsas, and seeds with your friends and families and neighbors, right? This idea of having a secure food system in, say, maybe a 30,000 foot view of all of Yavapai County or all of northern Arizona or the Central Highlands regions, right? That's where you start getting into this idea of resiliency, that we're able to grow things that are well adapted and we're not totally dependent on outside or foreign food sources. And this rich kind of mosaic of seeds and crops that do well here and feed the people around here can be think of as both regenerative, sustainable, and culturally appropriate. And to boot, you're supporting local economies. Maybe you're just supporting your next door neighbor, but maybe some of you are taking it to a farmer's market or a food bank or a school. And then finally, if you haven't tried out the chat box yet, this is your first option, your first try. Put in the chat box, why do you want to save seeds? What brought you to this class? What piqued your interest in saving your own seeds? We've tried to take multiple points here, starting with you, the single backyard gardener growing for maybe preference, all the way up through our food system, and how seeds become really pivotal at each of those levels. Asterisk on the slide. Sorry, I almost forgot this one. We have a resource page that is full of information. At the end of this presentation, I'll try to take you to that resource page that's located on our website. And so a list of local seed banks is included in that list. So if you're good at taking down that extension.arizona.edu link right now, feel free to go ahead. If you're not, don't worry, I will circle back around to it and you'll have a chance to access that information later. All right, and Leanne, this is you. And yes, unmute, there you go.
Yes, you got me now? Am I there? Okay, good. So just a real quick, brief history. I could do a whole presentation on just the history of seed saving, but when humans learned how to save seeds, that allowed them to progress from being the hunter-gatherer societies to more agricultural society and being able to stay in one place. And it was really essential to survival. And when the Europeans arrived here in the Americas, they brought with them the seeds that they had been collecting for centuries from other countries. And also the Native Americans, of course, shared their seeds with us. And the slaves brought seeds over on the slave ships. And so there was no commercial seed market. It was all through saving and sharing. And then in 1924, then there was finally the first commercial seed company. And that's when people kind of started moving away from saving their own seeds. And then a lot of our biodiversity got lost. So there were crops that were around, over 150 years ago that we don't have anymore. So we really need to work on that to save our diversity. Unfortunately, now we have seed banks. And so those are really important for longevity and for our seed survival. So anyway, that's all I'm going to get into right now, because there's so much more to of the history of all that, but we want to focus on teaching you how to save seeds. Okay, Rebecca.
Thanks, Leanne. So where to start? No two seeds are alike. And not even every plant in the home garden goes to seed at the end of the season. So this posed as a difficult situation for Leanne and I, and how to distill this massive amount of information into something that could fit within an hour and be digestible by you all. So we've tried to organize the following information about seed types and also pollination and fertilization in a way that makes sense, and that scaffolding of knowledge kind of builds upon one another, so that at the end we spend a lot of time talking about the actual act of harvesting seeds. So we'll talk about seed types, but then also remember, we're trying to get you folded into this art and science of saving seed. So the first two that we're going to start with, different types of seeds. Open pollinated. So this seed will produce a plant like the parent plant. It is what we call true to type. Packets of open pollinated seeds might be marked as such. They might say open pollinated or OP, standing for open pollinated. So look for that if you're purchasing seeds. Also in seed catalogs, them defining this or marking whether or not it's open pollinated. Heirloom seed is next. An heirloom seed is just an open pollinated seed that has been passed down for at least 50 years. We note that this is a cultural definition and not necessarily a biological one, which was news to me. I learned this when we were putting this together. So note that it's more of how we culturally accept this type of seed, and it doesn't have any biological science differentiated to it. Next two. These two get sticky, and this is where a lot of the conversation happens. So the first is hybrid seed. This seed is a cross between two different parent plants. Seeds saved from a hybrid plant will not produce a plant identical to the parent. So it will not produce fruit or vegetable true to type to the parent plants. Hybrid seeds are required by the Federal Seed Act to be marked as such. So they will be marked as hybrid or F1. So F as in Frank and the numeral 1. They've been deliberately inbred to usually create a desirable trait. Flavor, roundness, color, drought tolerance, you name it, right? Most often they're bred for uniformity, good storage life, and to be produced on a massive industrial scale. So think of average fruit and vegetables that we have access to in supermarkets, right? That sort of scale of hybridization. And then a common tomato or a common example is the early girl tomato, is usually a hybrid breed. And then finally, GMOs, known as genetically modified organisms. Note that these seeds have been intentionally developed in a laboratory setting, right? A lot of science goes into the crafting and creating of these types of seeds. They are usually developed to withstand a large dosage of herbicide and or pesticide, which means that from that you can kind of delineate that they are grown in usually a monocropping setting or a really, really large setting, usually in commercial operations. So most backyard gardeners will not have ready access to this type of seed in a everyday basic seed catalog. But note that there is a lot of chatter on the airwaves. If you look into or research genetically modified organisms specific to agriculture, you will probably come across a whole lot of information that talks about how GMOs have been created to withstand certain realities of our world right now, drought being a big one, and how this is a boon to certain countries, developing countries, countries with high rates of food insecurity, the arid West, Southwest, etc. So try to keep that in mind when thinking about genetically modified organisms. All right, I'm going to pause here for half a second. We're going to use a lot of botanical terms, a ton of botanical terms, okay? So I'm giving you a heads up right now. Again, we have a resource page that we've posted on our website that you all have access to after this presentation. So don't furiously try to write down terms and definitions. We're going to be going through slides. And so I want you to know that you'll have a chance to have a definitions listing at the end of this, okay? And Leanne, this is you. And you're still muted, sorry.
Okay, all right. So pollinization and fertilization. One thing that's really important about this topic is that you really need to understand how a plant develops and how it matures so that you can actually harvest those seeds. Although you don't have to be a scientist or a professional gardener, you can do it in your backyard gardener, but you do need to understand some of the plant physiology so that you can be a successful seed saver. One of the first things I recommend people doing is, and this has been a challenge for me because I have a little bit of dyslexia, is learning the scientific names of plants, because you need to know those for when we, to know what plants will crossbreed with others, okay? And that's really important. You know, for an example, beet and chard, they have the same genus and species name. The first word in the scientific name is the genus, and the second is the species. And the species is what is really important because two species can cross-pollinate. And I'm going to get into the pollination a little bit later. So don't be too intimidated by it. Even if you can't pronounce it, you just need to be aware of it and so forth. All right. So the first kind of plant we're going to talk about is the inbreeding, which is also called self-fertilizing. Okay, and that is when the offspring, the new plant, is going to be just like the parent plant. Okay, and those flowers have the male and female parts in the same flower, so they don't require an insect to carry or wind to carry pollen from one flower to another. Or so that's really good. So some examples of those are modern tomatoes, peas, lettuce, and beans, because those flowers have all the parts that they need to reproduce all by themselves. Okay, and then with outbreeding, that's also called cross-pollination. That is when the sperm of one plant fertilizes the ovule of a different plant. Okay, and so those offspring are going to be genetically different than both the parents. Okay, and they require a vector to transfer that pollen. It's you have pollen being transferred by wind, insects, sometimes animals, but that's not very common in vegetable gardens in our backyards. Okay, and some examples of those are beet, broccoli, carrots, kale, spinach, and things like that. Okay, so those are, to know if you're going to get cross-pollination, you have to understand those different types of flowers. Okay, and then you also have another plant that's in between. Okay, they can self-fertilize or they can cross-pollinate. An example of that would be fava beans. Okay, and what the picture you see here is from Rebecca's garden. She called it Franken pumpkin because she had two crops in her backyard last year or this year. I forget the details, sorry. But anyway, that cross-pollinated, so you can see that. Now, you can still eat that plant. Sometimes it may not taste as good as what you want. It could be a surprise, and sometimes it could be bitter, but I would at least go ahead and try to eat it. Don't waste it. Okay, so and one thing you need to know too about cross-pollination, if it does occur, it is not going to affect the fruit that you're eating this year. And you'll hear me refer to fruit a lot because vegetables are fruit, okay? And so it's not going to, so if they cross-pollinate, what you eat is still going to be fine. It's going to taste like, let's say two squashes cross-pollinate. It's still going to taste like your zucchini and all that, but the seed from that zucchini, if you save it, will produce something different as represented in the picture. Okay, that exception is corn. Okay, because with corn, if it cross-pollinates, the fruit this year will be different, and that's because you're actually eating the seed this year. Okay, so, and that's also too because corn is wind pollinated, so you can have when you plant different species of corn, you have to plant them really, really far apart from each other. Okay, so, and the other thing you need to make sure that you do in your backyard is to make sure you have good seed set. And the ways that you do that is with your inbreeders or your self-fertilizing flowers. You need to make sure that there is some type of external movement by wind or insects. For example, if you're growing things in a greenhouse and you want it to produce fruit, you have to either have a fan or go through and shake it a little bit. And that's just to make sure that the pollen travels down to the ovule part of the plant. Okay, it's really important. But that's usually not a problem in Yavapai County unless you just are in completely wind sheltered place, but most gardens don't have that advantage. So usually wind is going to move things enough to help that pollen move. Okay, and the other thing, okay, and with crossbreeding pollination plants or outbreeding, you need to make sure you've got enough flowers blooming at the same time. So you need to plant at least 2 of the plants that you're trying to grow. Like tomatillos, for example, you won't get any fruit if you don't have at least 2 tomatillo plants, because those are important for cross-pollination. Okay, and you also need to make sure you've got enough insects in your garden. So this goes to a different topic. So you need to make sure you've got flowers and other things in around your garden area that's going to have a healthy, beneficial pollinators for insects. Okay, and something that you can't control is if the environmental conditions are right. Like this summer, you may not have had enough squashes, or I mean, I had some squashes that didn't develop very well, and I think it was because it was too dry. A lot of times, if it's over 90 degrees, that pollen that the insects is moving from flower to flower, it could dry up and not be viable pollen by the time it gets to the next plant. So, you know, that's something unfortunately we can't control, but you need to keep that in mind. Okay, so for your isolation methods, so how are you going to prevent that cross-pollination? There's quite a few different things you can do. One is the timing of your planting. If you're going to want seeds from one plant, but then you can wait like 3 or 4 weeks so that they're flowering at different times. Okay, and we do tend to have a little bit of shorter growing season, so that may or may not be possible in your conditions. Other things that work is using physical barriers in your backyard. In the picture, you'll see some netting over some plants. So, and where that comes in handy, let's say you don't have a very big space, but you want some, you know that you're going to want to save some seeds from that particular plant. We'll take peppers, for example. And so you've got 2 or 3 pepper plants, different species of pepper plants growing next to each other. So you can cover one of those up, okay? And then after you can see that the flowers have started developing a little bud of pepper, then you can tag that, take a piece of yarn or something and just put it on that stem. And then you know that you can save that pepper for your seed, okay? And the reason being is because anything that, even though it's self-pollinating, if the plants are too close together, they can still cross-pollinate. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen because insects will go back and forth. Like if the insect gets there, as soon as that flower opens and goes to another flower, as soon as it opened, then you could get cross-pollination with those. And another good thing to do to prevent that from happening is that your plants that are self-fertilizing is to plant them at least 10 feet apart. If they're at least 10 feet apart, the odds of them cross-pollinating is very, very slim. So you don't have to worry about that as much. And another option for the physical barriers is instead of doing a hoop with the netting over it, you can also just get little clear bags or mesh bags and just tie that over a couple of the flowers on your plant. Let's say you've got 2 tomato plants close together and you want to save seeds from one tomato plant and not the other. You can, as soon as those flowers start to open up, or that little bud or flower actually before it opens, and you can put that little bag over the flower, and then after it starts to develop the fruit, then you can take it off, and then make sure you tag it though, so you'll know that that tomato is true and was not accidentally cross-pollinated. And so then that will be the one you'll save the seed from. Okay, so it isn't that difficult, it's pretty easy. And also too, the little bags are also good to put over dried seeds heads that Rebecca's going to get to later to help you save the seeds so that they don't shatter all over your garden. Okay, and if you're going to grow corn, they either need to be really grown, the different species need to be grown like a mile apart, and we don't obviously have that option, but they do make special isolation bags for corn. They're like a paper, waxed paper and stuff like that, so the wind can't get through to it. Okay. Other ways that you can isolate them is you can have rows of thickly planted flowers, shrubs, trees, buildings, you know, things like that, to, so that you don't get the cross-pollination. And like I said, the distance between the self-fertilizing plants, if you don't want to have to worry about it, is at least 10 feet. And for all your other plants, they're all different. And we included a chart at the end so that you can refer to that if you need to know how far apart those plants need to be to do that. And another thing that's easy to do is only to plant one variety of pepper or tomato or something like that. But if you're like me, I like lots of different types of tomatoes. So that's not an option for me, and my garden's not quite that big. And another thing that's really good to do is, if you can, let's say you've got 2 plants of your favorite tomato, save seeds from both of those tomato plants, because then you have more genetic diversity in your seeds that you're going to save. Okay. And then if the plants that cross-pollinate, you need to make sure that you've got enough plants so that they actually can cross-pollinate. Like with spinach, spinach has some of their plants are all male flowers and some are all female flowers. So you have to make sure that you have both of those in your garden, but most people don't plant just one spinach seed, so that's kind of easy. All right. And if you have something that cross-pollinates, just go ahead and eat it anyway, you know? So, but the important thing we want to get to y'all is to save the seeds. Even if you can't get it perfect, don't worry about it. I learned a lot about seed saving from a gentleman called Bill McDorman. He works with the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance, and all they do is teach farmers and gardeners how to save seed. And he even told a story one time. He was at a restaurant and had a really good tomato that he just loved, that he'd never had before. And so he saved some of those seeds from that tomato. He put some of the seeds in his pocket, took it home, and then the next year he grew the tomato plant. So the important thing is to start saving your seeds. That's what we really want you to do. Okay. And now it's Rebecca's turn.
Thanks, Leanne.
Mm-hmm.
All right, getting into harvesting and processing. So the emphasis throughout this whole process will be to save seeds from healthy plants, right? At the end of this process, your seeds should be firm and plump. Obviously, different varieties and species are going to have different types of seeds, different sizes of seeds, different colors of seeds. So you'll want to know what that specific variety will look like or should look like in the end, and make sure that you're only saving the healthiest, most viable ones for later years, later planting. I wanted to give a quick shout out to some of the materials that you might need. We've definitely linked to a lot of resources, how-to videos, websites, etc. Just the nitty-gritty. These are some of the things that you might need. Coffee filters, a jar or some sort of container. Glass is usually preferred. Strainers of all different sizes, buckets. If you have screens, especially if you foresee yourself doing this often and for many years to come, maybe look into investing and or making your own screen. The diameter becomes really, really important when you're trying to save really small, tiny seed. So think of something like a carrot, for example, versus a bean is, pretty large. And then pillowcases, like Leanne was saying, some sort of like maybe mesh bags or mesh anything would be helpful in this process. Oh, and that was my amaranth plant in my backyard, for those of you that are wondering. Okay, dry seed. So dry seed is a pretty, cut and dry, no pun intended, process. It's probably the easiest type of seed saving process that we're going to discuss tonight. So dry seed saving techniques apply to specific crops like beans, peas, lettuce, corn, different types of gourds, okra, maybe some types of chilies, it depends, herbs, and wheat. So ideally, in the most idyllic situation is that you would leave the seeds or the seed pods on the plant until they are completely dry, right? So this kind of takes some planning ahead of you're obviously harvesting and utilizing seeds and the fruits in a whole bunch of different applications throughout the season. But maybe like Leanne was saying, you're tagging some seeds. You would be intentional in leaving some seeds alone or seed pods alone to let them dry on the plant itself, okay? If they fall off the plant, that's good. Don't freak out if those pods actually fall off. Note that it just means they're ready, but be sure to pick them up off the ground, especially if there is intending to be some moisture or some weather in the forecast. Seed pods on the ground tend to get really moldy, and that ruins your seed harvesting process. If leaving the pods in the garden is not an option, you can always cut the entire plant, right? So you're cutting maybe that bean plant and then taking it somewhere inside or under cover and hanging it to dry. Note that in this picture, this is my backyard. You can see with my hand in the left-hand side of that picture, the top bean this is a tepary bean, is still green. It's still like super malleable and is not at all ready, right? Whereas the one next to it is well on its way to being dried out. So you'll have, successive different fruits maybe on even a single plant that are in different stages of the drying out process, and that's okay. On the right-hand side picture, I believe these are pinto beans in my garden. And yes, if you're noticing like leaves are chewed off and it looks really haggard, it's because grasshoppers and deer had at this plant. However, there's still a few seed pods that are hanging, and you can see they've completely turned this off-white creamy color. And if you were to go up and pinch them or squish them with your hand, they'd be super brittle. Okay. So once you have dried seeds, you'll probably do one of these processes, right? So threshing. Threshing is this term of separating the seed from the chaff. And chaff just really means excess plant material, whatever part of the plant it may be. And so you're doing this literally via crushing, stomping, beating, or mechanical process, right? And this is where you might need a screen or two. There's whole cultural terms and phrases associated with threshing and separating the seed from the chaff. So that is the process that you go into with certain types of crops for dry seed harvesting. Winnowing is pretty much a similar process. However, it's a lot more delicate because you are using air to remove that chaff from that seed. You're either blowing air through it, you're allowing those lighter particles of chaff to literally like float or blow away. And all of this is dependent on the seed variety, the species that you're trying to save seed from. A major note, seeds have to be completely dry before they are packaged for storage. And this is basically to prevent molding, right? You want to ensure that your seeds are viable, that they're going to last for quite a long time in storage. And so a shatter test is recommended. So after all of this process, you take a few of those seeds and you quite literally smash it with a hammer or something heavy. The seed should completely shatter. It shouldn't smear at all. It should be very, very completely dry. With some maybe longer oblong seeds, you can literally snap them. They should snap. That shows to you that they are in fact dry. a few side notes here before Leanne gets into wet seed processing. So recognizing that not all of you may be avid vegetable gardeners, and so you might be more interested in saving flower seed. So some common flower seeds that we've pulled together for you are listed here: calendula, echinacea, 4 o'clocks, hollyhocks, larkspurs, Mexican hat yarrow, etc. Right? Dry seed saving process is similar in that you're either cutting the flower or taking the whole plant and letting it dry for a considerable length of time before you store these seeds. And then a final note. So you might have some biennials in your garden, and how do you go about saving that seed, right? So biennials are crops like carrots, beets, chard cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, turnip, right? They need to undergo a cold period, or that cold season, which we call vernalization, in order for that species to set seed in that second year, right? The emphasis here is on separating each species by the needed distance. And if you cannot achieve that for the specific crop, you might think about only growing or saving from one variety when planning to save seed, right? So harkening back to our very, very beginning gardener days, the difference between an annual, which is a plant that performs the entire life cycle in a single season, right? All of the roots and leaves of the plant die off annually, and then that seed will only be viable for that next warm season usually. Perennials are plants that persist for several growing seasons. Generally, the top part of that plant dies back, but the root system is still viable and comes back. And then with these biennials, they require 2 years to complete their entire life cycle, right? And so that first season might result in like a small rosette or something kind of near the soil surface. And then the second season's growth, you get like stem elongation, you get the flowering and that actual seed formation happening. Okay, so just a quick reminder that for certain crops, you're going to need to do this over 2 years. All right, and here's where we get into wet seed processing. And Leanne, you're still muted, sorry.
Okay.
You're good.
All right, so with wet seed processing, so we're talking about plants where the seed is embedded in the flesh of the fruit. Like when you eat your squashes, your pumpkins, your tomatoes, those seeds are inside the fruit. So how do you get them out? And you could just take them out and let them dry, but it's better to let them go through what we call the wet method. And that's because what it does is it replicates the natural process that the seed would go through in nature. Okay, so there's yeast that eats off the gelatinous membrane surrounding the seed, and also then a mold develops, and that helps prevent seed-borne disease. And the two families of plants that is mostly related to is the Solanaceae and the cucurbit family. Okay, so those are the ones that you're going to be focusing on for doing the wet seed process. And it sounds a lot more complicated than what it really is. So don't be intimidated on say, oh my gosh, that's just too much work, I don't want to do this, because it really is quite simple. So let's start with your tomato. What you do with your tomato is you just take it and you just cut it along the equator. And what that does is it exposes all those little chambers in the tomato at once. And then you just take your finger and just scoop them out and put them into a jar. Okay. And then you can eat the rest of the tomato. Okay. And then you put water in it. Okay. And then you let it sit in a warm area out of the sun for about 3 days. Okay. And you don't want to go over 3 days because then the seeds will start to germinate possibly. And you want to stir it a couple of times a day. Okay. Because you will see the mold starting to develop on the top layer, and that's fine. and you'll see the pulp rise to the top, and then the mature seeds will sink to the bottom. And if you don't have any mature seeds, like if you picked your tomato when it wasn't ripe yet, then all the seeds are going to float to the top. The reason the seeds sink to the bottom is because they've got that embryo inside of the seed. So you know you've got mature seeds when those seeds have sunk to the bottom. Okay, so after your 3 days, then what I do is I scoop off the top layer, and then I know I'm only dealing with the mature seeds. Then you put it in your strainer, and then you just rinse it lots and lots and lots with water until you've got it clear and you've got all of the pulp off of those seeds. And then what you're going to do is you're going to strain them out and dry, and then spread it on coffee filters. And why do we say coffee filters? That's because if you put it on a paper towel or a newspaper, those seeds are going to stick, okay, and they're not going to dry as good. But the coffee filter actually absorbs the moisture away from it and allows it to dry a little bit better. And even better if you put the coffee filter on top of a screen or something like that, so it can get air from underneath. But if you don't have that, don't worry about it. They're still going to dry. And if for some reason, if we lived back east or something, then we would need a fan or something to blow over the seeds to speed up drying. But when I've dried seeds here at home, I mean, things are dry in 2 or 3 days. So drying things in Yavapai County or in Arizona isn't a problem. But don't let them dry in direct sunlight, because if you put them by a sunny window or something, the sunlight could damage the seed, and it would reduce the quality, vigor, and the germination of it. So, and after you get them dry, if there's any pulp or anything that stayed on it, then you can just rub it off with your fingers, okay? And then you do the same process with your cucumbers, but your cucumbers, you just cut those lengthwise and scoop out the seeds, okay? It's pretty easy. Then you just let them dry, okay? And then with your squashes and melons, you want to scoop out those seeds, and you just let those soak for 4 to 6 hours, or 4 to 12 hours rather, I'm sorry, in water, because that just helps loosen all that pulpy residue and the sugars that are clinging to the seeds. And again, the mature seeds will sink to the bottom, and the immature seeds will float to the top. And that's a good way to know which seeds are going to produce a plant for you. Okay, and your peppers, there's 2 ways you can do those. With your peppers that have a thick wall, like a bell pepper, you want to scoop those out and then rinse them and everything, just like you do with your other plants, seeds. But then if it's a thin-walled pepper, and that would be like your cayenne or your habaneros, something I never grow because I don't like the hot stuff. Anyway, you can let those peppers completely dry out, okay, before you scoop out the seeds, because they've got that thin wall of the pepper. But like with your bell peppers and something, if you try to let those dry out, they're actually going to get moldy and stuff like that, and you won't have a good viable seed. So how do you assess your plant for seed maturity to know when it's ready to harvest those seeds? With your tomatoes, eggplants, sorry, wait a minute. Sorry, I got mixed up. With your tomatoes, melons, and watermelons, you're going to harvest those as whenever you would eat them, okay? So for really good tomato seeds, you can let it get a little bit softened. Like I pick my tomatoes when they're still firm on the plant, but if you want to make sure you're going to use that one for your seed saving, you can get it a little bit softer, because the longer the plant or the fruit stays on the plant, the more mature your seeds are going to be. Okay, but with your melons and watermelons, it's the same thing. Whenever you're going to eat them, you can do that. But then when you go through the water process, you're going to know which seeds are mature and which seeds are immature. With your peppers, you want to let those stay on the plant until it's reached its final color. Like with bell peppers, those always turn red when they're fully mature. So if you normally pick them when they're still green, that's not one you want to save seeds from. You want to let it stay on the plant until it has turned red. Okay, with your winter squash, you can have two options with those. You can harvest it when you're eat them, or you can let them stay on the vine until the skin is very, very hard, okay? But you don't want to, and you can also store your winter squashes, but you don't want to store them longer than 2 months because then the seed starts to lose viability. And with your eggplants, cucumbers, zucchini, and yellow and summer squash, you want to let those stay on the vine till they're really big and the skin is starting to turn, and the skin will also toughen. It'll get really hard. And the way you know it's hard enough is when you try to put your fingernail in it. It should be hard to push your fingernail into the skin of that fruit. And when that happens, you know it's time to harvest the first seeds. And like right now, that, you know, giant zucchini that gets lost under all your leaves, that would be the good one to save those seeds from. Okay, and again, like with Rebecca said, with the dry seed method, you want to make sure those seeds are firm and plump, and you also want to make sure you completely dry them before you store them. That's really, really important. And so, and then the way, how do you store those seeds? Okay, you have to remember that a seed is a living entity. One of the authors I read, she referred to a seed as a baby in a box with its lunch. Because, you know, when you start a seed, the seed has everything that it needs to grow those first 2 little cotyledons. Then after that, you have to start feeding it, or it gets nutrients from the soil and then from the sun. So the goal of seed storage is to slow down that metabolic process and to protect it from the environment. And that's what you're really trying to protect it from is high heat and humidity. We're in Arizona, we don't have to worry about the humidity part so much, okay? So Rebecca talked about the 2 tests to know if your seeds are dry enough. You know, hit them with a hammer, or with like your beans and your corn, your larger seeds, do that. Or if you can snap them in half, okay, then you know they're dry enough. When you hit it with a hammer or you try to snap it in half, if it's mushy or not dry enough, it'll mush. It'll mush out and it won't shatter. So the shatter test is really important. For storage, I like to save old jars. I like to save spice jars, little tiny jars, or you can use envelopes. You can use just about anything to put your seeds in. And you know those little silica packets that or desiccant packs that you find in shoe boxes and all sorts of different things. You can actually put one of those in with your seeds, and that will absorb any excess moisture that you need. And make sure you label your seed, okay? That's really important because especially with some of the smaller seeds, they look alike. I mean, you can't tell what they are. Like you think of your kale seeds, you can't tell one kind of kale species from the other just by looking at the seed. All right, so make sure you label it. And one of the couple of things you want to make sure you note on there is, what was your original seed source? Was it from a seed catalog? Did you buy it at True Value? You know, make sure you write down where you got those seeds, okay? And also keep notes about how well that plant did for you that growing season. Did it tolerate the drought we had this past summer? You know, any extra notes and how long it took to germinate, because keeping good records is going to help you with that, okay? And then you do not need to store them in a refrigerator or freezer. They just need to be stored at a temperature below 80 degrees. But the main thing you want to remember is you want to keep them cool, dark, and dry, okay, until you're ready to plant them again. And do not vacuum seal them, okay? Because remember, these seeds are living little embryos in there. So, and most seeds that you save, you want to use them within 2 to 4 years. They can last a lot longer depending on the variety, but we want you using your seeds, using them, plant them, share them with your neighbors, things like that, okay? And then before you plant them, you'll want to do a germination test, but that's something we'll get into in a different class. So, All right, that's it.
And I wanted we had these slides switched at the end, so I apologize for that. So some final tips for your seed saving adventure. Like Leanne mentioned earlier in this presentation, you're trying to save seed from multiple plants to ensure genetic diversity, and because cross-pollination sometimes happens, so just be aware of that. Leanne has already mentioned, keep really good notes. If you don't have a garden journal, you might want to start one, because there's just a plethora of reasons as to why you want to look back and see, what did you do? Why was this the one that you saved? What happened in that one corner of the garden, etc. And it's really good for you to know and have something easy to reference. Being well organized, labeled, and remember to experiment and to also share your seeds, right? I absolutely love when any of the master gardeners or home backyard gardeners in this area share seed with me. I especially love getting seedlings and or seed from the farmers market, from farmers that have been growing in our area for a really long time. I swear the best tomatillos that I have ever gotten are from Pollinate. So keep that in mind too. And now we're gonna switch to questions. So I believe I stopped sharing my slide here. Can someone confirm that?
I think we still see the slide, but that's okay, Rebecca. We can see you too.
Cool.
Oh, there's your list of resources. Go ahead.
I was going to scroll through the whole thing just because we're here. So this is what you will have accessible electronically on the website, and we can go there in a minute if you so choose. And then remember, for more information on any of our programs, you can visit our website and learn more. So thanks so much.
Great. That's great, Rebecca and Leanne. Thank you so much for sharing your presentation. We do have a few questions from our attendees tonight, so I'm going to put those out there one at a time for you. The first question comes from Synth Brush, and she asks, my hollyhock seeds have some sort of bug or weevil that made a hole in the husk. Are those seeds goners?
Yes.
I concur.
Okay.
Yes. One thing you can do next year to try to prevent that, as soon as you collect those seeds, put them in the freezer for about 3 or 4 days, and that will kill any insect eggs or anything that might be in there. Okay. I've done that with beans and things like that. A dear friend who's been a gardener for many, many years, she says she always puts her beans or her dry seeds in the freezer, ones that are prone to getting insect eggs in them, puts them in the freezer first. So all's not lost. So try again.
Okay.
But if they've got holes in them, it's not going to grow.
Okay. Probably not the answer that Synth was hoping to hear.
I have a question.
Pam, I am going to read the questions for the presenter. So could you put your question into the chat box, please?
Yeah, I saw like a different kind of a thing, like speak into this giant orange box, but I'll figure that out. 1 second.
Okay, thank you, Pam.
Yeah.
Okay, so our second question comes from Peggy. And Peggy says, I have onion chive. I saved 3, but only 1 flowered and is in bloom now. Is the onion chive self-pollinating, or am I out of luck since no others flowered?
I don't know.
Yep.
Do you know about chives, Rebecca?
I was gonna say I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
I
don't know about those. One thing you could do is, with those seeds that you get from that, you could do a quick germination test, and you would know if they're good, if the seeds are healthy. So, but I would have to look it up too. I don't know. I know more about vegetables and flowers than I do about herbs. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, so our third question comes from Lauren Paz, and she asked, how long are the seeds viable after you properly store them?
That depends on the seed, but I would say on average 2 to 4 years if they're stored properly. But with the big seed banks, they do things, and they do, you know, really cold storage, and they can store them for a long time. But even when I read about the seed banks, they even take out their seeds and go and grow them somewhere and then save seeds from that crop again. So even in a seed bank, those seeds are constantly being turned over or changing, you know.
Yeah. And I was going to say that a lot of seed companies or nonprofits that are really intent on saving seed would say the same thing, that the whole act of saving seeds isn't to save them indefinitely, but it is to save and then grow and eat and utilize and then save again. And so the process of continuing to grow them is very much tied to the storing process. But you wouldn't want to take like a tomato variety or something, save it, and then try to grow it 10, 15 years down the road. The whole point would be to just keep growing that crop, whether it's in your backyard or your friends and family's backyard too. So trying to find places where these seeds can eventually grow. And I think that 2 to 4 years, I know for me, I would want to get right at it. If I went through the effort of saving it, I would want to get right at it the next year even. So keeping in mind that that whole process is very much linked, that we're not expecting these seeds to stay on the shelves indefinitely.
Yeah, remember, it is a living thing, even though it's just in a dormant state.
Okay, great answer. Thank you, guys. All right, the next question comes from Carolyn Shelley, and she asks, I read that adding a piece of chalk to the jar would absorb any moisture left in the seeds. Is this a viable idea?
I've heard that too, actually, Carolyn. I haven't come across it in our research though, and I would have to maybe to defer to a more of an expert. But what I've seen is anything that wicks away moisture or that could absorb moisture when you're storing seeds. I think the very first thing that you want to ensure is that it is completely dry to begin with, and therefore you don't really run into that problem of excess moisture later on. Leanne, what do you think?
Well, pulling from a different part of my life, I think chalk might work, because rock climbers, they always have a chalk bag to get rid of the sweat off of their hands. So when you think of, and I'm just trying to think of the compound that chalk is made of, it probably would work, but I wouldn't bank on it without researching it more. But if you don't have any of the little bags that you've saved from packages, another thing you can do is get a little bit of dried milk and put like a tablespoon of dried milk and make a little package out of tissue or something like that. And so then the dried milk will absorb the excess moisture. But chalk probably would work when I'm thinking about other ways that I've used it. So.
Okay, interesting. I never heard of the chalk solution or the milk solution. So thank you, ladies. And I'm going to answer Peggy's question here. She's asking if somebody is going to get back to her on the onion chive question. And yes, we do have master gardeners at the help desk who can help us look that up, unless Rebecca or Leanne want to.
I was going to say now might be a good time, because I'm just looking through some .edu sites and some other sites to look up your question, Peggy. But if I can share my screen again, give me just a sec.
Okay.
Is everybody seeing the Yavapai gardening with the flower?
Yes.
And the butterfly. Okay, so this is our website, extension.arizona.edu. And to get to this page specifically, you do /Yavapai-gardening. Down here in this gray box, you'll see our presentation, Seed Saving for the Backyard Gardener for today. Our recording of this will eventually be uploaded here, but some things that Leanne and I have pulled together that were super helpful for us. We have a definitions page, we have Southwest seed companies, and then we have a seed saving resource, okay? So let me know, can you still see a PDF?
Yep.
Okay, so this is what we leaned on when putting this presentation together. A lot of really awesome books, both locally and from across the nation, and some articles that are timely. You know, during the COVID pandemic, there's been a lot of chatter about seeds. And so if you're interested in that, there's some articles. Peggy, some organizations and some websites that you could easily click on and drill down to chives would be, or any of these really. Organic Seed Alliance, Seed Savers is a really good one. Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance, Urban Farm Gardener Education with Bill McDorman. And then for those of you that are interested, there's some local seed resources. Prescott Farmers Market in Western Yavapai has a seed exchange that happens. The Cottonwood Public Library tends to have a seed exchange indoors. You might want to check with them this year since of due to COVID, but during the winter or the off season. And then Prescott College did have a seed library. I haven't heard on the status of that lately, but they had a pretty cool one that a student did for a project. And then as always, with any topic that Master Gardeners or Cooperative Extension brings to you, there are free publications that are available to the public on a variety of topics. They are written in a scholarly way to relay the latest research and findings. And so you might see if chives or onions have a publication all of their own. It might not be through U of A, it might be through another cooperative extension like University of Nebraska, Cornell, something else. But know that this is available to you and to anyone else just right on our website.
Yeah, and can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so, and another thing I want to point out is we do list some seed companies that grow seeds in an environment that's very similar to ours. And so like if you want to get a jump start on growing plants in your garden that are more adapted to this environment, then you can buy, I'd recommend using some of these seed companies, because if you buy your seeds from Burpee or some of the other big seed companies, a lot of those seeds are grown in the South, or some of them I even heard have been grown in China. Okay, so a lot of those seeds aren't grown in our area. These are companies that do have the seeds grown in a similar environment. So you're going to get that jump start on the seeds and plants being adapted to our area, which is really important.
Yep.
So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leanne. Okay, so Peggy, hopefully that answered you a little bit. If you want to reach out to our help desk, maybe I can ask Lauren to post an email into the chat box that people can reach out to with any other questions.
And it's also on the screen right now, Jen. So
there you go. Okay.
Both of our offices, Camp Verde Master Gardener Help Desk, and then Prescott Master Gardener Help Desk. And I can just leave this slide up.
And let people take note of that.
Right.
So that's great. That's great. And since we have a couple of minutes, I am not seeing where Pam Demo was able to reach us through the chat box. So Pam, if you are still with us, please join us now if you still have a question that you would like to propose. I'm scrolling down through the participants. I think maybe we lost Pam. So sorry about that. I think that's all the questions that we have coming in for tonight. And thank you so much, Rebecca and Leanne. This was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed learning all about the seed saving. So thank you. to the both of you. And I would like to go ahead and remind our participants that our next presentation is scheduled for October 28th. Steve McIntyre will be talking about container gardening, so please watch your emails for more details about that. And I think with that, we will call it a night. Thank you.